Capitol, 1 year later. Here is Tom Llamas.
Hey, good day. We are coming on the air as Congress marks 1 year since the deadly attack on the Capitol. Just minutes from now, a ceremony that includes a prayer and a moment of silence on the House floor. The scene inside the House chamber right now, as you can see, solemn and hushed. Much different than the chaotic and violent afternoon 1 year ago today. Let's listen in as the invocation starts.
Incline your ear to us and hear our prayers for our Congress, for our nation, for its people. As compatriots, we are too often separated by politics and perspectives, individual certainties and intractable opinions. On this anniversary of national discord and despair, send your healing spirit among us and tend to the dispiritedness and disagreement here within and around the people's house. This day, into your hands we commend our spirits of fear, anger, and uncertainty, and ask that you would revive in us our shared commitment to this country's highest ideals, its strength in its diversity, its power in its defense of the common good. On these virtues was our country founded, and for them countless heroes have sacrificed. Remind us, inspire us, the aggrieved, the skeptical, the disenfranchised, all of us, to hold true and remain worthy of this noble heritage. We offer the words of Abraham Lincoln, that once again we would emerge from our national turmoil with malice toward none and charity for all, with firmness in the right as you give us to see the right, to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves. Merciful God, restore to us this sacred obligation of unity and moral purpose. Inspire us to live lives which serve as a witness to your restoration and reconciliation. We pray your peace over your people. In your sovereign name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Catherine. Pursuant to Section 11A of Resolution 188, the Journal of the Last Days Proceedings is approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pursuant to Section 4A of House Resolution 829, no organization or legislative business will be conducted on this day. The chair will address the chamber. Today, 1 year ago, the Capitol and those who work within it were targeted in a violent insurrection that sought to undermine democracy. As we acknowledge the horror of that day, we honor the heroism of so many, particularly U.S. Capitol Police, institutional staff, floor leadership, committee, and member staff. We had a session this morning where we could say thank you to many of them. Unfortunately, COVID did not enable us to have the full House. We will have another time when the attending physician allows. But as we acknowledge the horror of that day, in the face of extreme danger, they all risked their safety for our democracy by protecting the Capitol complex, members, staff, press, etc., press within, safeguarding the ballots in those mahogany boxes to validate the election, and ensuring that Congress could accomplish our purpose and honor our duty to the Constitution and to our country. That day and in the days after, they were the defenders of our democracy, and their courage and patriotism remain an inspiration. Because of them, Congress was able to defeat the insurrection, to return to the Capitol that same night to ensure that the peaceful transfer of power took place. Because of them and our members, the insurrection failed. 1 year later, this sacred space where members legislate, children learn, visitors are welcomed, was defiled and damaged. We know that. As we reflect on that darkest day, we remember that the insurrection sought not only to attack the building, but to undermine democracy itself. When the violent assault was made on the Capitol, its purpose was to thwart Congress's constitutional duty to validate the electoral count and to ensure the peaceful transfer of power. But the assault did not deter us from our duty, I say again. In this Capitol, a symbol of democracy to the world, that evening, the Congress, because of the courage of all of you, rose to honor our oath and protect our democracy. We did so honoring the words of President Lincoln during the Civil War. "Fellow citizens," he said, "we cannot escape history. We will be remembered in spite of ourselves. No personal significance or insignificance can spare us one or another. We hold the power, therefore we bear the responsibility," Lincoln said. Today, we accept responsibility as daunting and demanding as any that previous generations of leadership have faced. Since the January 6th insurrection, there have been continued assaults on our democracy, undermining the sanctity of the vote and the integrity of our elections, which are the basis of our democracy. Let us be true to the vision of our founders, who brilliantly established our democracy and made it a model for the world. Let us honor the sacrifice of our men and women in uniform who protect that freedom with their lives. And let us remember the words of another president, our patriarch, President George Washington. When he delivered the Constitution to the Congress, he said this. He said, "This Constitution represents the creation of a government which would allow for the continuation of rigorous debate, but relies upon the common sense and good faith of the American people to find the better angels of our nature." As we proceed, let us find our common ground, reach our nation's heights with liberty and justice for all, remembering the words of our great patriarch, and in the spirit that our chaplain referenced of President Lincoln, with malice toward none, with charity toward all. Let us acknowledge today, as I conclude, I want to acknowledge our fallen heroes of that day. U.S. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, U.S. Capitol Police Officer Howard Livingood, Metropolitan Officer Jeffrey Smith, U.S. Capitol Police Officer Billy Evans of a later assault. Now I ask all members to rise for a moment of silence in their memory. Thank you. Pursuant to Section 11B of House Resolution 188, the House stands adjourned until 6:30 p.m. on Monday, January 10th, 2022.
We've just been listening to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi addressing a special session of the House 1 year to the date that rioters stormed the Capitol as they were trying to certify the electoral victory of President Joe Biden. Garrett Haake was there 1 year ago. He's our senior congressional correspondent. He was in the Russell Rotunda, where he is today, as he joins us live for this special coverage. And Garrett, I'm just wondering your thoughts. You know, the Capitol is not only the beacon of democracy for our country, it's also where you go to work every day. And I wonder if there's been a day you haven't thought about what happened on January 6th.
Not a single one. I mean, this is a community, and the difference between then and now is that a year ago, every member of this community experienced that attack in roughly the same way. We lived it. We were here. It happened to people we know. It happened to friends and family and loved ones, and it was a kind of uniting experience in those 24 hours. In the 365 days since, the attack has become a divisive experience. You look at the chamber floor just now, you saw 30 or 40 Democrats on on one side of the chamber. The House is not in session today. This is the only business they were conducting. On the Republican side of the chamber, only Liz Cheney as an active member. She's also joined by her father, the former Vice President, Dick Cheney, who hasn't served in the House in more than 30 years. That speaks to just how divisive and divided the Congress has become over this issue. And it really boils down to this. Democrats are willing to place responsibility for this attack at the feet of the former president. Republicans are not. We heard that from President Biden today in his remarks this morning. Listen.
The former president of the United States of America has created and spread a web of lies about the 2020 election. He's done so because he values power over principle, because he sees his own interest as more important than his country's interest, than America's interest.
Tom, just sampling of the president's speech here this morning, I think the bottom line for history is how will we view the January 6th? Will it be the same united way we looked at it in the immediate aftermath of that day a year ago, or will we remain as divided in the future as we are about it right now?
Yeah, it's the big question, and Speaker Pelosi asking that we all try to find common ground. And we can't forget what happened to Speaker Pelosi on that day. She had to be ushered to a secure location. Her own staff hunkered down in a conference room. And, of course, those rioters, once they stormed the Capitol, calling on her name, looking for her, even breaking into her office. This is the moment right here with their feet, at least one rioter with his feet up on their desk. We know that Speaker Pelosi still has a door that was broken into, a mirror that was broken on that day as well. As all of this was happening, one of NBC's reporters, Ellison Barber, and her team were on the Capitol Hill steps. As all of this was playing out, she had a microphone in her hand, and she was live on both NBC News and MSNBC. Ellison, what do you remember about those moments?
Hey, Tom, you know, we'd come to the Capitol, this side of the Capitol, by about 8 a.m. that morning. We'd come for what we thought would be a small protest taking place in the day. I was standing almost in this exact spot in the afternoon as we saw those rioters come through and burst through bicycle racks just like these, almost in this exact same place, and then make their way up the Capitol steps. As you look around today, what we have noticed is a heavier presence, at least on foot, of Capitol police officers. We've seen more of them on bikes as well. Even before January 6th, the United States Capitol Police, they say they had staffing issues, but they have lost about 200 officers for various reasons since January 6th, and they say staffing remains an issue today. At the same time, some of what has been pointed out as the biggest failures of that day were tied to intelligence, and Capitol Police are adamant they've made dramatic changes in that regard. They say now leadership as well as officers are receiving intelligence briefings every single day, that they're working better with external law enforcement partners to share intelligence, and that they are in the final stages of getting a new intelligence director. Thousands of people flocked to the Capitol this day. Over 725 people have been arrested in the year since they arrived on this on the Capitol steps on that fateful day. More than 225 people have been charged with assaulting, resisting, or impeding officers or employees. 640 people charged with entering or remaining in a restricted federal building or grounds. 70 people have been sentenced so far, again, all for activities related to what took place here on January 6th. The new Capitol Police Chief, the Speaker of the House, they have said that there is no doubt in their mind that the Capitol is safer today than it was a year ago. But from spending the entire day here a year ago, talking to the people in that crowd, the rage that we saw, the beliefs, the mindsets that they had, the arguments we heard about things that were simply not true. What happened on January 6th was more than just a failure of security or mistakes made by the United States Capitol Police. And we still hear today elected officials, the former president, pushing the very lies that led people up those Capitol steps on January 6th.
Yeah, Ellison, you know, as we see the video of when this riot took place, we are all reminded that the Capitol turned into a crime scene that day. You saw it, you heard it, you personally felt it. And on that last point you were mentioning, there are people out there who would like to sort of revisit this and add some revisionist history. There's no way to describe this. There was nothing peaceful about these moments right here.
Right. I mean, I've heard people, and people have said to me before, that it was outside agitators, left-wing groups like Antifa. I was here all day speaking with people starting at 8 a.m. I was here talking to people as they came down the steps and then told us that they had made their way inside and made it to Nancy Pelosi's office. The idea that this was agitators, left-wing plotters, none of that is true. The idea that this was a peaceful protest and just a few people got a little out of hand, that is not true. We watched as the Proud Boys extremist groups marched around, chanting around the United States Capitol. And then we saw some of the things left on the ground, Tom, of bear spray, debris that people had thrown and used to attack law enforcement to make their way up those stairs. What happened here, it was not peaceful. Tom?
Allison, thank you. We're also joined by NBC News political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd. Chuck, you know, the president earlier today had a line that sort of struck me. He said, today is not about being bogged down in the past. This is so the past isn't buried, right? He wants to make sure we don't forget. And as we remember, I want to ask you, what have we learned?
Well, what we've learned is I think our democracy is more fragile than we realize. What we learned is how broken our information ecosystem is. I mean, Tom, a year ago at this moment when this was happening and I was anchoring on the air at the time, I, along with many others, and I think inside the Republican Party as well, thought, all right, this is it. Trump's gone too far. This will break it. This is how the Republican Party finally is able to rid itself of this Trump virus that has sort of hijacked the party. Here we are a year later. It is just the opposite. Trump has more control. He is of this party. Those that want to speak out and have spoken out are very few. We've obviously Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger are among the most prominent. Those that know better but want to stay in their jobs have decided to appease this and go along with it. And I really think it comes back to this, Tom. We have a broken information ecosystem. There is a large, loud minority, but it's a large minority who believe the former president's series of lies here. And no amount of truth-telling is probably going to penetrate these minds. This is why the real lesson here is how weak the elected Republicans have turned out to be. Whether it's Mitch McConnell, who I think thought somehow he didn't need to impeach it. He didn't want. You have a lot of Republicans that want to get rid of Trump, but they don't want the fingerprints. Let somebody else do it. I think for me, the lesson here, Trump is not going to be out of our politics unless members of the Republican Party kick him out. And they so far have chosen not to do that.
Chuck, on that point, and going back to the speaker's speech just moments ago about trying to find common ground, were you surprised by the tone that the president struck earlier today? Because it was no doubt a prosecution of the former president 1 year later.
I think it was something that he had been avoiding. What was remarkable to me about it is that it's gone. We went a year without him responding to this. You know, he wanted to stay above this. And a lot of people thought this. If you ignore some of the craziest rantings of the former president, maybe he'll fade away. Maybe this will wear itself out. 1 year later, that's not the case. That's why this president of the United States, Joe Biden, had to do what he did. He had to do it for history's sake, but he had to do it, I think, for those that are on the side of the democracy here and want to know, is he going to be a bulwark for it? And I think this is why a lot of people have described it. I think this was probably easily the most important speech he's given as president, and I think it's his best. And I'll tell you this, if you think that speech was partisan, then you believe the former president's lies. It's only a partisan speech if you think there's somehow a truthful dispute here. If you're pro-democracy and pro-America, it is hard to look at that speech and say, oh, it's politically skewed. And to see today some elected Republicans try to have it both ways, condemning what happened on January 6th, but then trying to memory hole how we got to January 6th, and instead try to play politics with it, I think it just shows you, unfortunately, how powerful the former president's hold is on approximately 30 to 40% of the American people.
1 year later, we are learning something, and we are still growing as a country. And that speech from the president and Speaker Pelosi also teaching us new things as well. Chuck, Todd, Ellison Barber, Garrett Hake, we thank you for all of your reporting. That concludes our coverage of today's moment of silence on the House floor. Lester Holt will be back with you here again at 5:30 p.m. Eastern for the House and Senate prayer vigil set to be held on the Capitol steps. He'll also have a portion of his exclusive and very candid interview with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi today, discussing her memories of that day and its lasting impact on democracy. I'm Tom Llamas. For all of us here at NBC News, thank you for joining us.